Tonight on Arming Main Street Radio.
Yeah, Google's mission when they started was do no evil.
Right.
They changed that in recent years.
Connor has a Freudian slip.
It's hard to stick to not being evil.
Yeah.
Or is it?
While Kendall tries to keep him on track.
So what are we talking about today, Connor?
Blockchain, cryptocurrency, and we're generally talking about digital artwork, NFTs, fine art provenance.
I think that's a great segue.
Let's say a DAO, a smart contract, I don't know, the opioid crisis.
Elon Musk's like 1.5 billion.
Then I think that's an easy way to kind of lead to...
Ethereum, the underlying APIs. We need to do more with clean energy.
We'll talk about energy in another podcast because that's a whole different thing, but...
Don't wanna be an American.
All right, welcome to Arming Main Street. That's Connor. This is Kendall. Let's get into it.
Let's go.
So what are we talking about today, Connor?
So today, I thought, coming off such a serious topic, let's keep it a little lighter. Maybe talk about blockchain, cryptocurrency, and what's hot right now, NFTs. If you're unfamiliar, this stands for non-fungible token. And if you're still unfamiliar, because I would be if I hadn't spent so much time looking into it, it's a unique piece of information that you can say, is one of a kind. And you can point to the owner of it. In this case, we're generally talking about digital artwork. Because that's why NFTs are all hot right now, and all the journalists and media outlets are kind of like, ooh, do you buy trading cards and digital artwork online? So it's kind of where we're going to go with. We're going to use that as a segue to talk about the underlying technology.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. So just to kind of give people an idea, Chiefs Patrick Mahomes sold a one-of-one NFT for $247,000 and has reportedly sold $3.4 million worth of NFTs.
God, this just sounds like printing money.
Basically. And essentially, I guess, to give a little...
Oh, hey, Chad. Oh, wait, am I muted still? I may have muted the Clubhouse still. Hey, welcome, Chad.
Yo, sorry about that, dude.
Perfect segue. We're talking about NFTs. I just talked about how Patty Mahomes, quarterback for the Chiefs, have sold something like $3 million in NFTs. And essentially, like Connor was saying, this is an NFT. I like to think of it almost as a trading card, but it can be anything, and it's data. So prior to some of this underlying technology that we're going to get to, like blockchain, you could basically copy anything, and there was no way to uniquely identify it as, this is a portrait of, I don't know, Connor, let's say, and it is a 101. This is the original portrait of that. That's what blockchain allows us to do.
And the Army Main Street, trading card NFTs are going to be coming out in a week or two, so stay tuned, guys.
Oh, Jesus, that's on your timeline? Give it maybe a month.
Sorry. Not to interrupt, Kendall. I think that's a great God.
Description.
Yeah. I just want to give people a way to think about it, right? Because NFTs, cryptocurrency, all the things, it can be really confusing because what we're moving from is physical, tangible assets to digital, sort of abstract assets, right? Or at least that's what we think is the future. So, we went from trading like shiny shells, a few thousand years ago, to what do we trade today? We trade dollars that are basically backed by the government in the sense that it's like, yeah, we're saying the value of this is $20.
Exactly.
And so now, because we can uniquely identify data, now NFTs have become a thing. And I think going off that trading card analogy, just another sort of way to bring it in for folks, make it kind of realistic is, think about like the trading card boom that's going on right now. physical trading cards are trading like crazy.
Yeah.
Well, really, if LeBron James put together a highlight package and sold it as an NFT and said, you're the only person that has this uniquely identified highlight package of me, how is that any different from selling any collector's item?
And to me, it's less about the fact that you like get to have that thing, because and this is where people, I think, start to be like, why would I own like a digital picture? Can anyone copy that? Like, I know we're talking how secure it is and like whatever,
right?
But it's actually not about the security of it, it's the fact that there is only one, and less so that there's only one, but it acts almost like a bearer bond. And if you're familiar with bearer bonds, it's basically like if you own it, you own all the rights associated with it. Right. And so if someone takes your asset, like ESPN, right? So let's say that LeBron James sells his image of his dunk, right? And someone else then airs that on ESPN. Right. And ESPN makes earnings through basically the advertising during that episode, right? You're entitled to some portion of that earnings because that media, which you can prove that you own, was utilized without your permission. And that's where this kind of really starts to become as important as it does, is because it gives ownership rights to things that have previously not had ownership rights really around it. Right. And you're still going to maybe get digital or physical forgeries, right? But we're going to be able to tell who should have the original, because we know who owns it. And in fine art collecting, this is why fine art is as valuable as it is. It's known as a concept called provenance, which means that you can track the ownership of this fine piece of artwork all the way back to the artist who created it. And so there's some sort of story or something attached to it along the way. And because of this, it inherently adds value, because the authenticity, the heritage, the lineage. Right. And, there might be some bumps and bruises along the way. Maybe that artwork gets damaged at a party you have. Right. It does not matter, because what you have is proof of it being the original. Maybe it depreciates a little in value from the damage. Maybe it increases because you're a famous person and you owned this piece of artwork and there's proof that you owned it. Right. So it's more about this like lineage of ownership and being able to understand who has the rights to something. Right. That's what that entails, because historically, like, visual media artists get ripped off and copied all the time. Right. Right. And how do you prove who had the original version of this? Right.
So do you have to be rich in order for like this to be attainable? Like, how do you make something worth value? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, to some extent, probably, because it costs cryptocurrency to buy NFTs today, right? It's pretty hard to buy NFTs. You have to have the knowledge of how to set up, right. a wallet, which is certainly a technology skill. You need to have access to the computing resources in order to set that up. And then you have to feel comfortable almost utilizing things that are inherently kind of made very weirdly, because they're not commercialized products yet that are ready for a mass market. Right. And try to purchase something like that.
And I think, frankly, are speculative in nature. Not that I don't believe in Bitcoin. Yeah. But what is its intrinsic value besides the fact that, like, we're giving it that value? You know what I mean? It's not an asset that necessarily right now is generating, well, I guess it is generating massive wealth, but not because it has some like tangible value add, right? And then I think that's a great segue, this point of, okay, we know we've kind of explained what an NFT is. How did we get here, right? Like, what and so Connor knows more about this than me, but we can start with blockchain.
So I think the question that we have to ask when we're asking how do we get here is, what do we hate about the internet today, right? There's a lot of really good things going on the internet, right? We've, to some extent, really open source knowledge. We've got YouTube now. We've got Khan Academy. We've got Coursera. Right. There's paywalls and barriers all over the place here, and you need to have a computer to access it. But, you know, there's stuff that's essentially owned here. Right. And people are getting real value for it. It's enabling a lot of people to enter into new job roles and skill sets that they wouldn't have ever imagined and transition and pivot and learn.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of positives where the current web is at. But I think to the same extent that there's positives, there's also negatives, right? And what we can see is that the only real way that we've commercialized the internet, from my point of view, is advertising.
Agreed.
And
Yep.
advertising is run entirely on these large data silos, and you may have heard some information about how valuable your data is. And you know that Facebook and Google and Amazon and IBM and Microsoft, and I could just keep naming technology companies you've heard of, but the reason they're worth as much as they do is because of all the information they have about you and other businesses. And this data is inherently valuable for predicting outcomes of other economic activities.
Right.
Right? Like, when I show you an ad, what's the likelihood that you're going to eventually go purchase? If I know that, then I can resell that ad placement to a company that would want to sell you something with the confidence that they can expect you to eventually buy it. And to me, there's something inherently off about that model, right?
Right.
Because it's predicated on providing access to all this information and resources in exchange for, you know, raking you over the coals for everything about you as a person or as an identity without you knowing it.
They're selling you,
right,
essentially. And they utilize the data in order to essentially build who you are as a person. And
the digital copy of you.
Exactly. And they sell that to advertising agencies. And what this makes me think about is essentially blockchain, cryptocurrency, all the things that we're about to get into that are sort of how NFTs are born. They're all an offshoot of the creation of the digital economy, which is not something that I think we often think about, but I'm a software developer, right? And building apps, that does not exist without the internet. Every YouTuber, the Logan Pauls of the world, right?
Or
right.
Hopefully there's very few.
Yeah.
They don't exist without the internet. So we've created this interesting economy that honestly provides endless amounts of jobs, an endless space for creativity, an endless space for gathering knowledge. But at least right now, the vast majority, I would say, of how our data is used is mostly just building a digital copy of you and being like, Kendall loves the outdoors. Guess what we're going to feed him? Patagonia ads. Especially around fall. Every time. And he's going to spend lots of money at Patagonia because he can't help himself.
Right.
You know?
And you know, they're capitalizing on a capitalist consumer-oriented culture. And, like, honestly, keep flashing lights at people and you can start directing them where you want them to go.
Absolutely.
I think where the issue really starts to pop here, though, is the concentration of power when you have all this data. As Spider-Man's uncle said at one point in time, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And there's this element of, Google's mission when they started was do no evil, right? They changed that in recent years for clear reasons. It's hard to stick to not being evil. Or is it? I don't know. It depends if you're a McKinsey consultant who's been brought in to run the company.
Right.
These are the same McKinsey consultants who are, you know, responsible for things like, I don't know, the opioid crisis.
Right.
You know, what they're really good at is understanding business models and optimizing for profits.
Right.
And creating cash cows. And there's a lot of shortcut taking in that, and there's a lot of taking advantage of people in that.
So let's kind of dive in then into because the digital economy is what it is, and it, like we pointed out, is kind of built on advertising,
right?
And data, obviously.
I'd rather, instead of referring to it as built on advertising, I'd rather it be built on data for the purpose of discussion.
That's a great
Advertising
point.
Is just the clear monetization of it to our consumer audience.
That's an excellent point. It's built on data. So, blockchain,
right?
And you're going to go into detail on this, but blockchain is essentially, again, a way of securing, from what I can understand, a transaction between two parties, right? And making that a unique transaction.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think your understanding of it's correct. And the example that everyone likes to use with blockchain is that it's a financial statement, right? Your balance sheet. You've got the money you spent and the money you earned, right? And you're saying, hey, Connor paid Kendall $50. Now, it's not Connor or Kendall in this case. It's some random hash of numbers that uniquely points to our wallets. And they don't say how much money transferred, just that money transferred. And this is what they mean when they say that it's like semi-anonymous or anonymized to some extent. It's because you have a public address that doesn't have to be who you are, and you can always be changing your public address because, you know, you have the right to be private. Now, whether or not, like, that matters, I don't know. Like, that's a key part of the technology, and I think that's an interesting component. I care less about that piece in reality, but what is trustworthy about it is the fact that that transaction is now been mined in public, and it's registered where everyone can go read it, and no one can change that happened because there's only 100 transactions, or I forget the exact number, but think about it like this. There's only 100 transactions on a piece of paper at a time.
Right.
And every piece of paper links to everyone before and after it with this crazy hard math problem, which is where the security comes in. And in order to rewrite all those chains of papers that are all like linking back and forth to each other, you would need to have at least 51% of the computing power. And then you'd still be doing it in the visible public and convincing everyone that, hey, even though we've changed the data on, you know, all of this information, there's a dispute between 51% and the remaining 49%.
Right.
And they call it a 51% attack. You may have heard of it, maybe speculatively. But the idea is that once you've written this information down, it's there forever. Right. And there's implications to that beyond, obviously, the benefits from security, because you can imagine that data is stored in a log forever that's always growing, and whatever it could be a problem in and of itself. And people are solving that with what are called Merkle trees, which is where instead of it being a linear succession of like reference, you be basically crisscross patterning a mesh through it, where there's inheritance trees as opposed to a line of succession.
I see. Okay.
But yes, so essentially you're securing a log of data in the public, and in this case with Bitcoin, it's a financial log of who owns what coins and when they transact them.
Okay. So that's actually the perfect transition. So blockchain, the way I understand it, right, is our secure, unique ledger of a transaction. Well, the blockchain then spawns cryptocurrency, or does cryptocurrency spawn the blockchain? Let's clear that up.
So, in my understanding or opinion, right, is that blockchain spawns cryptocurrency because the reward for being a miner, and let's clarify what a miner is here. It's not a child. Wordplay.
Or a coal miner.
Or a coal miner.
Same industry, but like 2 centuries.
Yeah. I mean, but a miner in this case is, you can picture it as Amazon's server farm, honestly, because that's what they are now. But what they are doing is providing the computing power to solve these super complex mathematical problems and create the next block in the chain or the network of blocks that hold this information. So they're recording for all time the records, and in exchange for that, the computing power to essentially provide that security, they're being issued a certain amount of tokens as a reward. And those tokens inherently have value because humans have determined that they have value. Why anyone owns Bitcoin, and full disclosure, I own Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin because we're in a bubble right now. It's totally... I'll say totally safe with an asterisk around it. At some point it will
provide financial advice.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
We are not being held liable for any financial advice.
Exactly. But that being said, right, like I am holding an incredibly speculative asset that is only representative of the power of the technology, but it's about as useless as the US dollar, if not more so, because there's no one saying it's worth something. It's just the market holding it up.
Yeah, it's not backed necessarily.
Except for by
anything.
Elon Musk's like 1.5 billion.
Okay. Again, there's so many more coins than that out there that
Sure,
like it's kind of
absolutely.
like arbitrary to some extent.
So essentially, cryptocurrency is the reward miners get, and miners are folks that are facilitating the blockchain by offering up the computing power
Right.
to do the sort of complex math problems we're talking about.
And when I was talking about the 51% of TAC, if you have 51% of the network's computing power, that is when that TAC is viable. This is why there's so many discussions right now about how scary Bitcoin really is, because China's getting close to that 51% mark in terms of concentrated of
Gotcha.
computing power.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's then transition, and I know we're moving through these technologies because we want to talk about the pros and cons and kind of the greater societal kind of stuff at some point here. But what's a smart contract like? Wait.
So I feel like it's a misnomer to some extent. They call it a smart contract, right?
Right.
Because essentially it has a set of rules, and if you follow the rules, you get a token, and you get a token, you get a token, you get a token, and it's, you know...
Gotcha.
It's basically, in my mind, though, the way I would describe a smart contract is an API service or an API call. And for the non-tech folks out there, it's essentially a way to say, here's a couple pieces of information, go take that information, do something useful with it, and then give it back to me at a specific point in time, you know, based on the set of rules that you wrote into the code.
Right. That makes sense.
The only
So, like,
difference is...
Sorry, information on loan or like is right?
No, so it's
I have
literally
no idea.
you're a smart contract. This is why I say it's a misnomer. Is it's just facilitating some transformation of data.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just so happens that like a lot of the use cases right now is transfer this amount of this amount of cryptocurrency from party A to party B when these things happen.
Yeah. So,
Which is a contract in real life.
you know,
But in reality, it is not necessarily only that. It could be any sort of API service.
Yeah.
The big distinction here is once you create a smart contract, you can never delete it. Or, I mean, you can delete it or it can just not get used, but you can't change it.
I see. Okay.
So once it's live, it's an API that never gets changed.
Great way for thinking about APIs for folks that are just like tech. Whenever you open an app and you give it credentials, right? Those credentials are going out to a server. Essentially, you're just offshoring the computing of a thing, right? It's at some secure server, some secure location. That server then says, okay, I've got these credentials. That matches up with this user. This user might have profile. Let's say it's Netflix, right?
Yep.
Not that I don't know how Netflix is set up in their backend, but you authenticate yourself with a username and a password. That's the information you're giving to the API.
Mm-hmm.
That API then says, okay, this is this user, and let's just keep it simple. This is the profiles associated with that user. So for me, that's me, my mom, and my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Those are those profiles. Cool. We send that back. Now, the thing is, what Connor is pointing out, especially with smart contracts, is, in my example, I can change that API however I want to.
Right.
Whenever I want to.
If
Smart-
you're Netflix, of course, not the
you're,
user.
Right. If you're Netflix, not the user. That's an important distinction. Smart contract is essentially what I just said, except we're never changing
Right.
the API
Mm-hmm.
that we're
It-
accessing with credentials.
It takes building good code to a whole new level. You got to be product ready For the get-go, like
Yeah.
production ready, sorry, for the
Yeah.
get-go.
So then I think that's an easy way to kind of lead to the fact that DAO, or decentralized autonomous organizations, essentially it's a company that operates by specific rules laid out by code. Mm-hmm. Kind of like our API, right?
Exactly. Except for where this one differs a little bit is that via DAO, you could be in charge of like a protocol network. Let's say it's Ethereum, right?
Okay.
Let's say a DAO controlled Ethereum. And let's say that Ethereum was set up not so that the miners were the ones that had to agree on any changes to the underlying APIs or protocols, as they call them.
Right.
If instead that was controlled by a DAO, right, the DAO could have some sort of government structure, like a democracy or a republic. And it could have human interfaces that determine those changes. And you could redistribute, voting rights or control of the network from those who provide the mining to those who actually operate on the network.
Right.
And it becomes an alternative mode of governance. The reason why this is so important, and this happened in the Ethereum network, is there was this big heist, ironically, over a DAO set of tokens that were issued. And basically the Ethereum Foundation that controls Ethereum decided, you know what? We want to roll back that transaction, redistribute the cash to the parties that should actually belong to, and prevent that theft from occurring.
Gotcha.
How did the theft occur? Well, that had to do more with how the DAO set up their smart contract. They left their own vulnerabilities. It's not that they got hacked. It's that someone more or less found out that they left their password on a table and took their money.
Right.
So, stupidity is not the cure for, security. Like, that's always going to be a problem. You can't change that. But from the other side of it, it's like, well, most of the network, 86% of it, I believe, decided, hey, we're going to go along with this new Ethereum. But 15% said, no, we're keeping this. We got the money. We believe that you shouldn't roll back. Everything is permanent.
Right.
They made a mistake. They have to live with that mistake. They should die by that mistake. And not like physically die, but financially die.
Right.
And
it should cost them something.
And that's why there's Ethereum and Ethereum Classic.
Okay. So we kind of have these sort of.
But how do you prevent that fork from happening? That's how a DAO comes in.
Gotcha.
Sorry, just to finish that thought.
No, you're good. I think these are kind of some of the underlying technologies that have now made an NFT a thing.
Right.
So, what does this mean for us? I have thoughts on the idea of digital assets and things like that, but you could tee it off because I know you're really passionate about it.
Yeah. So I think the best way to describe this is, and I forget, I was scrolling through Twitter earlier, and one venture capitalist or another that I follow actually tweeted this out today, and it resonated really well with me. In hindsight, you only recognize that the revolutionary technologies that change the world are the simple, basically twists of two things. And so Facebook is the internet and your social your social network, your friend network, whatever. And that's the thing that they changed. They figured out how to take and replicate your friend group and your interactions with your community and bring it online.
Right.
And so with blockchain, right? This is a question about who should own or be powerful on the internet. It gets back to our data storage discussion, right? So to me, blockchain is a technology that begs the question, how do governments and the internet interact, right?
Gotcha.
With the HTTPS protocols that govern our internet today, the open web as we think of it, right? Those protocols that go get us websites and feed us back information are the very same sets of protocols that the blockchain utilizes, right?
Right.
Blockchain is just a different set of these protocols. Instead of HTTPS, you type in whatever the blockchain protocol is.
Right.
And so as a result of that, it begs the question, right? Should Google, should Amazon, should Facebook, should, any of these other giant technology companies really have the rights to our data? And there's a lot of great economic arguments why they get to keep the data they already have on us. But what blockchain provides is a potential way for us to reclaim our data, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
And in that process, institute a new model of governance on the internet. But with the way our technology-driven culture is already going with, like, the Internet of Things, to me, what blockchain represents is a new model of governance of society, of individuals, of people in general, and of businesses. So to me, what we're talking about is an economic revolution and a governance evolution that could be global. I mean, because this technology is so pervasive, all you need is internet access.
Right. And at some point here, we'll have 100%. It's like it's odd because the internet has basically been right up there with electricity and water,
right?
And like food. Like it really has gotten to that place for a lot of communities.
And for everyone who thinks that that's stupid, to me, that is the representation of how to access, utilize, and apply knowledge and information, and that's how we grow as a society and as a species and as individuals or companies or whatever subsection you want to use. Without information, without new information, we stagnate. We can't continue to grow and get better.
It levels
access.
Exactly. It levels the playing field in that it makes access so available to everyone.
And it's not just about the accessibility data, it's accessibility to trustworthy data. Because as we remember with Web 2.0, where we're all on the internet now, because the advertising algorithms and advertising dollars run everything, we're very susceptible to manipulation. We saw this in the 2016, the 2018, and the 2020 elections. The effectiveness of it is what we argue about. Whether or not it's effective, the amount of money that gets spent trying to manipulate us is a part of the problem, because we have so many people out there who can't tell the truth from not truth. And and a lot of it is so skewed, because if you understand how to use statistics, you can use them to say whatever you want and back it up with math. Statistics are so manipulatable, but when used correctly, they're just incredibly powerful. I mean, even when they're used incorrectly, still incredibly powerful.
Right.
But, yeah, what's up?
Yo, can I ask you a question real quick? I don't want to derail, but we've been talking about a lot of interesting technology stuff, a lot of, fascinating information, but it is basically all on the level speculative. What are the chances this actually gets adopted as Web 3.0? What are the chances that blockchain isn't just some niche, interest from the 2020s that, people look back on in 20 years and are like, what the fuck was that? And we're on to something else.
Where the NFTs are going right now, I think reminds me of the .com bubble, right? Where everyone's buying up domain names because, this word's going to be so much more valuable in the future because someone's going to want pets.com. And, some people are going to be right and make money on it, but a lot of people are going to be wrong and, lose a lot of money.
Dad owned jazz.com, and let me tell you.
He sold too soon. He should have kept Holy. So, So to me, I think we're basically at the Web 3.0 bubble bursting point. So this is early 2000s to me. I think everything that comes on later is what's going to make or break the technology. But I think, the next Google's already been made. Arguably, I want to be the next Google. So maybe there's hope that they're MySpace and I'm Facebook.
Right.
But
it feels like vengeance. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just because if you don't do something right, I'm going to come in and do it better. Or that's my ego, that's my, whatever coming through. But that's kind of where my take goes with it. I mean, Kendall.
Here's my thing. I agree that it's speculative in its nature, but what gives it legitimacy is really wealthy and accomplished people giving it that. Mark Cuban, for instance, has been talking about this. He's in. Obviously, Elon is in. that gives it a level of legitimacy. And that's not to say that a bubble won't burst. Where I think there could be a hiccup is the energy needs
Yeah.
of these things, right? That's actually where I'm like, okay, I hope some people are using, their Bitcoin to invest in like battery technology and renewables, because if we don't, it's really energy intensive.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, because everyone who I've talked to about it has been kind of enthusiastic about, like, I mean, obviously, look at the way Bitcoin's growing. Like, there's something here to be enthusiastic about, but the energy cost is a serious concern. A lot of people seem to be aware about it, and there's really not a lot of accessible information that I've found about what's being done about it, if anything.
Right.
So where this energy concern comes from is kind of getting back to a point that we talked about earlier, right? Where the data is ever growing longer, the math problems are ever growing harder, and the computational power required to secure this entire network gets exponentially larger.
Right.
Now, there are some technologies out there that are working on how do we reduce the amount of computational power it requires to secure the blockchain so that it can be both trustless, which is the idea that there's no third party in control of it, and yet at the same time trustworthy, because the data you're reading in or using for your programs is all correct and not lies or manipulation or whatever. And to me, my only pushback here is, yes, the blockchains themselves are gigantic and energy cost consumptive. Do we not see something similar going on with server farms like AWS of Google Cloud Computing? Computer resources in general take up a lot of fucking energy.
Yeah, that's good.
And where my mind goes with this, and this is my take on it, right? And this is my hypothesis, is that you're never going to get everyone in the world to agree on one data service architecture to run all their businesses on, right?
Right.
Which means zero redundant data store, zero redundant computational usage. Yep. You don't have to recalculate the same numbers that everyone's already recalculated for the millionth time. We should all just share those numbers, because we're wasting so much energy to repeat those computations.
Right.
In a traditional server architecture, that would require basically me saying, hey Google, hey Facebook, hey Microsoft, hey Amazon, hey IBM, instead of your guys' super valuable data silos, let's just make one giant data silo with all your data together, right? And save the computational resources. I think when people have the discussion about blockchain technologies, and I know that they compute a lot more than...
Right.
But where I'm going with this is that with blockchain, there is no third party in control here. There is no Google, there's no Amazon, there is no anything. So all you need to do is make an attractive alternative to store all this data to begin with, which blockchain provides to the masses, not necessarily to the large enterprises.
Right.
And you reduce their data consumption elsewhere as a result of it. Right. And what you could see is potentially a convergence on usage on a single blockchain that stores all data. And at that point, and it would be market driven. It wouldn't even be like having to regulate these companies into doing it. It's more likely that you're going to get an outcome where everyone's on one blockchain network than you are going to get all of the companies in the world to coordinate and agree on one database model. And to me, there is energy savings in that. And I think that when paired with developments in better hardware, we can get the computational processing up to a point where, it reduces the amount of energy. And I agree with you. We need to do more with clean energy. Like, if we can power these with 100% renewable, who fucking cares how much energy it consumes?
Exactly. And I think that's... We'll talk about energy in another podcast, because that's a whole different thing. But, if we can power this with renewables, who cares? I think another thing that I think about is, no offense to the folks who represent us in our republic. Many of them grew up in an age without the internet, right? Were not just adults, but some were middle-aged by the time the internet was in its infancy.
Right.
We're really slow to regulate technology, and not that regulation is the answer to everything, but we haven't even figured out how to regulate social media so that misinformation isn't being spread. You know, we might be 20 or 30 years away from figuring out the blockchain thing. And my thing with this is less that we need regulation for legitimate transactions. It's that we're going to need because this is skirting so many safeguards against things like black markets, right?
And I think that no market should be illegal, personally. I think if every market is transparent, what you can then do is put pressure on markets to change their behaviors as opposed to just outlying them and pushing them to the shadows. I think what we've seen in countries like Amsterdam, where prostitution's legal, countries like, Portugal, where they've legalized all drug consumption, right? Yeah. Or maybe it's just a city there.
So it's not prostitution, it's sex work. Just to clarify.
Okay.
I know it's just semantics, and I know that it's just words, but at the end of the day, if somebody gains from that, then that's what we're here for.
Okay.
We'll have a podcast on that one soon, too.
Yeah, Matt can lead the podcast on sex work versus prostitution as terminology goes. So apologies if I offended anyone with the term prostitution. I mean having sex for money in some sort of capacity.
Right. There's a market for it.
Exactly. The market's always going to exist, and if we make it illegal, you just basically create an underground market where illicit activities go on, and as long as there's not too much light shined on it and you throw enough cash to your local representatives, you can get away with it. Instead, make it all legal. And that way, when predatory things happen, you can put pressure on the markets to change. You can basically call everyone out and say, hey, these are the awful things that are happening. Because I think at the end of the day, if an individual wants to make money through sex work, that's their choice. But they shouldn't be forced into it. They shouldn't be trafficked into it. And the dark markets create that.
So
personally, I have a huge problem with the way the world's run today, though. So, that's my whole stake on this thing.
Well, no, I think that question of markets gets to why we don't regulate
our problem
crypto. And the thing that where I want to head with the discussion is essentially right now there are the world's currencies, right? You've got the dollar in the United States, you've got the pound in the UK. The euro. There are these different kinds of currencies. We have different kinds of bitcoins, but without regulation. I mean, in theory, we could have endless amounts of different kinds of currency, and that in turn would create different markets, right? Each currency is running off of its own specific blockchain. So I could only accept, Bitcoin for a service or something.
Right. And that'd be your choice to do so, though.
True. But I think what that gets at is, if this is the way of the future,
yep.
What I think we have to think about is our current structure and how do you centralize it enough that it's easy to use for everybody.
Yeah.
And that, this is now we're getting into 20, 30, 40 years down the road, in my opinion.
I think it's only 5 to 8 years out, personally.
I couldn't see it in 10 years because eventually I think places like the United States, the U.S. government is going to say, the power to create and destroy currency is held in the government.
And they can say whatever they want, but they can't shut down the internet around the world.
No, they're not gonna shut down the internet around the world. But I could absolutely see them. And
they're
by
gonna be
them,
too
I
slow
mean,
to this, to be honest. In my opinion,
they
always are. History repeats itself. We know this.
Yeah,
They're just
10
gonna
years.
have to bull over, accept it, and be like, "Well, shit."
Yeah, they'll make laws. They'll accept
They're
it
gonna
and
try
make
to get
laws.
caught into the bribes.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing: is we kind of talked about this earlier. This is where the DAOs come in, right? The problem is we do need a human oracle to interface with these protocols, the cryptocurrencies, and manage the oversight of them. And this, to me, is where DAOs come in, because this decentralized, autonomous organization, set up and powered by rules that could be powered by democratic voice of governance, right? Where you could either have an electorate, who's specifically intelligent enough to make the decisions to do the changes, and you put them into power, or you let the public directly vote on it. And there's arguments for and against both of those, and we don't have to do that because that's just a discussion on regular politics. But in the case of blockchain, is all the technology's there, all this can be facilitated already, and I don't think there's a whole lot to do. And I think I think from my perspective, like Manny kind of already hinted at, is they're going to move too slow to recognize that they've been displaced as the governing body. I mean, right now, Facebook and Google are more or less competing to displace them as the governing body. Who do you think has better idea of who actually is a person or not in this country? Yeah, they're full of bots, but if you don't think that they know who the bots are and who the real people are, then you're just kidding yourself. Or the government doesn't even know, who's legal residents in this country or not. And I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't know those things. I am just saying that right now they're so far behind on the things that they should be capable of knowing that they're not going to fucking know what hit them when they realize what blockchain really is.
Right. And when folks actually start to really harness it.
And
its full potential, because right now it's still really in its infancy.
I think your main point is the most important point: is when does this become widely adopted by people? Right, because the moment that happens, one, it's beyond regulation, especially in this country.
That's a good point.
Not regulation. It's just like they can't take it back. It's Pandora's box. It's already open. But from the standpoint of how do you get consumers to get onto this high technology where you have this identifier that if you ever lose, basically locks you out of your money, your wallet, whatever. And I think that comes back to the DAOs again. Because the same way the government provides you the social security number, in my opinion, the DAOs provide you the wallets, the IDs that give you access to everything. So if you lose it, they can recover it for you.
And I think ultimately,
there will always be some sort of need for a trusted third party.
Like with anything, there's going to be good and bad. But our world is a constantly evolving world, and we're going to have to kind of roll with whatever changes we get. The only real concern I have is the energy usage. But frankly, I have concerns about energy usage for almost everything. So, that kind of is what it is in that sense. And so for me, where I ultimately land in the conclusion I ultimately come to is the internet is still evolving. It's only 20-ish years old. Older if you want to go way back, but the I'm going to count the moment we got dial up, like when I was like 6 or somewhere in there. That's so this ever evolving of that digital economy is just going to continue. It is what it is, and I think in a way it's ultimately inevitable because we're more linked from a knowledge and data sharing standpoint than we ever have been. Not just in recent history, I mean through all of human history and evolution. So ultimately I don't know that it's good or bad. I just think it's the next evolution of where we're already at, of the Internet of Things, of the internet economy.
And I know as much as I'm sitting here evangelizing and preaching it and saying how fucking awesome it is, I recognize that, that it's biased, and I'm realistic. I know that there's going to be a shit ton of cons that come along with this that we can't foresee today. Right? But it's like every other stage of technological evolution. There's a lot of good use cases, and that's where people basically come from when they create it, and then there are all the nefarious use cases that get developed afterwards when you recognize how else the technology can be applied. And to me, the perfect example is essentially when Zuckerberg created Facebook, he wanted no ads, right? But he needed a way to monetize it. And then, boom, the ad model rises. And then, boom, all incentives are driven around how to increase revenues from the ad model because those aren't just revenues, they're straight up profits because the cost of delivering them is nothing.
Yep. Chad, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, can I ask one last question before we wrap this up?
Yeah.
If you have bought into this, the idea of blockchain, and you would rather see it on the 5 to 8 year side of things than the 10 to 20, is there anything just like an average person listening to this podcast right now could do to speed up that adoption process?
Kendall, you want to take the lead first, maybe?
Yeah, so I think, right, if we want to speed up the adoption of these technologies, the first thing you got to do is arm yourself with knowledge, right? Which is what we're trying to do with this podcast on various subjects, but today, specifically, learning as much as you can, and then leveraging it in a way that creates value for you, whatever that is. Whether you're just investing in Bitcoin because you see it rising and you want to beat inflation, I don't know, or you're a great artist and you're like, sure, I'll sell some NFTs. Why not?
Yeah.
Just learning what it is and then leveraging it in a way that you value. And Connor, we'll let you close.
Yeah, and honestly, I honestly can't add too much more than what Kendall said because that was my answer as well. The more you understand about these technologies, the more you're going to be able to tell other people and inform them, and the more likely it is to get adopted. Now, let's say you don't want, blockchain to come to fruition. What you would have to do is not be using their technologies because ultimately a technology only comes to market when there's demand for it, right? So in my opinion, yes, go educate yourself, get involved, do something that makes you money on there to some extent, but also look at utilizing the underlying infrastructure, right? So a lot of these are just new software development companies that are providing old business models more cost effectively, more efficiently through these blockchain protocols. And, essentially you can save money while using their tools online to do the same stuff you're already paying someone like Salesforce to do. Right. So, just your money has power, spend it wisely. And then to do a shameless plug here, right? Because, Army Main Street is the nonprofit media outlet associated with our company, Emergent Digital. We're trying to build and bring a blockchain technology to life. It's the idea that we can store data, that your data is valuable, and we can help you license it. Not only that, the first product that we really want to license it for are you as individuals, small business owners, freelancers, and our go-to-market is creatives, visual artists. We're going to capitalize on this NFT trend, pair that with traditional e-commerce to say, hey, you're an artist who created this cool artwork. Let's sell the NFT. That gives you ownership rights to that piece of artwork. Then we're going to take that artwork, slap it on a whole bunch of different products like notebooks and tote bags and posters and whatever, right? And sell that to people at affordable prices. And then you as the artist get a royalty. You as the owner of the NFT get a royalty.
Right.
And then us as the holding company who facilitate that, we also get we get some of the money. Right. But, it's basically a win-win-win. Whereas today, artists create artwork for large corporations and they're mass-produced at scale, and that's one artist's voice that's in every Target store.
Right.
But as we've seen with Etsy, as we've seen with Society6, right, there's a huge demand for unique pieces of artwork, but these artists are getting raked over the coals by paying the fees that they have to advertise within Etsy when it'd be cheaper to go straight to Google or to cut Google out entirely. Essentially that's kind of what we're trying to solve for, and then reinvest that profit into rebuilding the digital infrastructure so that one day knowledge and information technology is universally accessible and trustworthy, because it's the only way we can continue to move forward is if we have people who are really smart stop trying to solve problems that have already been solved before and focus on new ones.
Right. So with that, that's this week's podcast. Keep arming yourselves with knowledge, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye, everybody.